Okay guys, today we are working on Unit 6, Lessons 9 and 10. So first off, I am going to show you a graph, and I would like you guys to list at least one thing you notice and one thing that you wonder about the graph. So here's the graph. Take a moment to look at it and write down one thing you notice and one thing you wonder. Okay, so a few things that you may notice would be more people do not play sports than do, or more people watch TV than watch not much TV. And the striped bar is taller than the blue for play sports, but the other way around for no sports. And then you may wonder, what does watches TV mean, or what does not much TV mean, or who is represented in the poll? Here on this slide, we see a two-way table. Why do you think this is called a two-way table? And another thing, what does the 25 mean, or the 55? And how many people are represented in this table? Also on the screen, we see a bar graph. Why do we think this is called a bar graph? And what do the blue bars represent? And how do you know that? And then, where does the 25 from the table show up in this graph? Write down a few things you notice and a couple answers to these questions. On this slide, we see a segmented bar graph. Why do you think it's called a segmented bar graph? And what do you think the vertical axis represents? Okay, going back to this slide to answer a couple of these questions. It's called a two-way table because we are looking at two different types of information. First, we're looking at how old they are, and then the second type of information that is also in the table is if they have a cell phone or do not have a cell phone. And so the 25 in this table would represent the number of people 10 to 12-year-old that has a cell phone, and then the 55 would mean the total of people that do not have a cell phone. And then to answer a couple of questions about the bar graph, why do you think this is called a bar graph? If we look at it, it is made of bars, and then the blue bars represent the people who have a cell phone. And you know that by looking over here on the side, it gives you a color-coded explanation as to what each bar means. And then the 25 from the table shows up right here from the 10 to 12-year-old who have a cell phone. Now back to this slide, the segmented bar graph. Why do we think this is called a segmented bar graph? Well, segmented means that it is divided into different segments, and so each bar is divided into different pieces. And then what do we think the vertical axis represents? So over here, this represents the number of people who have a cell phone or do not have a cell phone. Okay, now looking at this table, based on the data, who is more likely to watch the news daily? Someone who is younger than 18 or someone who is older than 18? Well, based on this, there are more younger people who watch the news, which is 30, than older, which is 10. On the other hand, the survey reached out to 110 young people and only 15 older people. Without looking at the whole table, that information may have been missed. So in cases like this, finding a relative frequency, including percentages, can be more helpful than looking at the actual frequency, which is what you're going to do now. Okay, so here we are looking at a two-way table that shows data about cell phone usage among children aged 10 to 18. So for the second one below it, complete the table, in each row the entries for has cell phone and does not have cell phone should have the total of 100%. So round your entries to the nearest percentage point. So take a minute and try to fill out the table, and then we will go through it. So this is still a two-way table. Instead of showing frequency, this table shows relative frequency. And then two-way tables that show relative frequencies often don't include a total row at the bottom. Why do you think that is? And then, is there an association between age and cell phone use? And how does this two-way table of relative frequencies help to illustrate this? So, in the 10 to 12 years old category and it does not have a cell phone, you should have had about 58%, and you get that by taking 35 divided by 60, and you get approximately 0.58. And then your total should be 100% here. Okay, the 13 to 15 years old should be 80%, and you get that by taking 40 divided by 50, and you get 0.8. Okay, and then the 13 to 15 that does not have a cell phone, you get 20%, since you take 10 divided by 50, and that is 0.2. Okay, the 16 to 18-year-olds that have a cell phone is 83%, and you get that by taking 50 divided by 60, and that is 0.83. And then again, your total should be 100%. And then for the questions, the columns are not percentages of the same number, so you can't add them. The percentages in any given column are not likely to add up to 100%. And yes, there is an association between the age and cell phone use. A much higher percentage of children from 13 to 18 years old have cell phones than children from 10 to 12 years old do. A survey in a class asked these questions, and it was, do you play a sport, and do you play a musical instrument? Here's a two-way table that gives some results from the survey. Complete the table assuming that all students answered both questions. And then to the nearest percentage point, what percentage of students who play a sport don't play a musical instrument? And to the nearest percentage point, what percentage of students who don't play a sport also don't play a musical instrument? So take a minute, try and fill in this table, and then we'll go through it. So for the plays a sport and does not play a musical instrument, you get 11, since you would take 16 minus 5. Okay, does not play a sport and plays a musical instrument, it would be 5, since you would take 9 minus 4. And then does not play a sport and does not play an instrument, you would get 4, since 15 minus 11 equals 4. And then your total would be 9, since 25 minus 16 is 9. For your total of plays instrument, you should get 10, since 25 minus 15 is 10. And then you have it filled out. Number 2 should be 69%, because 11 over 16 equals 0.687, and since it's a 7, you would round up. And then to the nearest percentage point, what percentage of students who don't play a sport also don't play a musical instrument? It would be about 44%, because 4 over 9 equals 0.444. Okay, now based on the data that we filled in earlier, here is a two-way table showing the relative frequencies by row. And then below, here's a segmented bar graph for the table. And so you can see that the blue means they play instruments and the orange means they do not play instruments. And so you can see how that's filled out. Okay, and then here is a two-way table from the data earlier showing relative frequencies by the column. And so now we are looking at the sports. And so using the values in the table, we are making a segmented bar graph. And so for the plays, we will go up to 50 and mark that in. And then for no, we will go up to 100 since that's another 50 and mark that in. And then for the play sports and not an instrument, it's about 73%, so just a little below 75. And then the rest of it is the 27%, so we'll go the rest of the way to 100 and fill that in. And that is how you make a segmented bar graph based off of your information. Okay, now we are looking at another table, and it is about an eraser factory that has 5 machines. One machine makes the shapes, then each shape goes through the red machine, blue machine, yellow machine, or green machine to have a side colored. The manager notices that the uncolored side of some erasers is flawed at the end of the process and wants to know which machine needs to be fixed. So, our job is to make a segmented bar graph showing the different colors of each color. And so, if we're looking at this, unflawed, it is for red, it's almost all the way up to 100. And then for flawed, it's very little. For blue, it goes pretty far up there, but not quite as far as red. So it's a little less unflawed and more flawed. And then the yellow is pretty bad. It's just below or above 50%. So that one's pretty flawed. And then the green, that one's pretty flawed also. That one is at 75%. And then the other 25 is flawed.